This podcast is made possible by the listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nash Villager Podcast. It's May 19th, 2025. On this day in 1993, the Tennessee Senate took an action that I'd mostly forgotten about. But as soon as I saw mention of it, the memories just started rolling back in. And it was an action whose effects are on display this time of year at ceremonies all over the state. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. In 1993, I was nearly 18 years old, getting ready to graduate from Laverne High School. I was never the kid who was too cool for that stuff. I ran in the crowd that fussed over every detail and wanted to make sure it was all just right. I mean, the valedictorians were two of my best friends, if that tells you anything. I was a class officer. We were very involved. But one aspect of our graduation was the political football of the moment, whether or not there would be a prayer, and if so, how it would be handled. A year before, in the case of Lee versus Weissman, the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled against the practice of including prayers by clergy at public school-related events. That case centered on a middle school graduation in Rhode Island, where a rabbi was invited to deliver a non-sectarian invocation and benediction. The parents of one of the students filed for an injunction, trying to prevent the prayers from being delivered. The case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, which agreed with the family that the practice amounted to an official endorsement of religion, which is a violation of the First Amendment's Establishment Clause. That decision built on another that the nation's high court had issued in the early 60s. In Engel versus Vitale, the Supreme Court reached a similar decision about a common practice in many states at the time, beginning each school day with the recitation of a non-denominational prayer. That was deemed unconstitutional for basically the same reason. That 1992 decision banning invocations by clergy members definitely caused a stir throughout Tennessee. We had long since shifted away from a prayer to a minute of silence at the start of a school day. Not that I knew anyone, even amongst the most religious of students, who seemed to use that minute for anything except fiddling with a pencil or trying to pass notes. But just about every gathering that felt kind of special still started with an invocation. Every school football game had a prayer being read over the PA right before the singing of the Star-Spangled Banner, and most folks thought it seemed really weird to imagine a graduation of all things without an invocation at the beginning. Very quickly, at the start of my senior year, school leaders in districts across Tennessee seemed to agree that there was a way to thread the needle. The Supreme Court had ruled that clergy couldn't lead the crowds in prayer. Principals and teachers probably wouldn't pass muster either. But the collective opinion seemed to be that students were in a different category altogether. As long as a kid led the prayer, it'd be okay, right? Looking back, I don't remember anyone I knew audibly questioning that logic in the fall. We just did it. We had one religious club on campus, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and student leaders of the club took turns going up to the booth of the football stadium to give the prayer, asking God to protect all the players from injury and help everyone be a good sport. Amen. Play ball. When a bill was submitted to the General Assembly seeking to essentially codify that student-led loophole into state law, as I recall, it was a little bit of a shock to some of us. Not a big one, but it did make us realize that the workaround we'd all just adopted might not be entirely legal without the state officially weighing in. And so there was something of a question. Would one of the FCA officers be allowed to start our graduation with a prayer or not? The talk at that time and place was very much as if it were the state versus normal people. Who wouldn't want a prayer? It was the done thing. Who would it hurt? But that was my perception through the eyes of an evangelical Christian in a community that was dominated by evangelical Christians. When I think back now, I do remember that one of my closest friends, one of those two valedictorians, did mention to me a few times that she didn't love the prayers. Her family was not at all religious. She didn't believe in God. And I knew that, but I didn't get it, you know? As close as we were, she only felt partly comfortable expressing what it felt like to be in the minority on that issue. I knew of a few Catholic families at my school, some Mormons, one family of Jewish kids. And I recognize now that they all tended to get pointedly silent when people talked about whether or not we'd be allowed to have that prayer. They believed in a God, but chances were whatever prayer was delivered at the ceremony It wasn't going to be the kind of prayer most meaningful to them. But I didn't notice that silence at the time. So yes, the talk was, why does the government want to get in the way? But that was a one-sided conversation where only the religious majority was willing to speak up and be heard. On this day in 1993, Tennessee's legislature approved the bill allowing prayer at public school events as long as it is student-led and the language and message of the prayer is not filtered through any kind of sanctioning or approval process involving the school's faculty or administration. The governor at the time, Ned Ray McWhorter, didn't want to touch it. His attorney general had sincere doubts that it would pass constitutional muster after the Supreme Court's ruling. Whether it was a kid saying the prayer or a clergy member, it was still a religious act at a public school event. And honestly, clergy would probably be way better than kids at understanding how to thread the needle of keeping an invocation somewhat neutral. But McWhorter didn't want to veto the bill either, because he knew how incredibly unpopular that move would be in this state. And in his family, he outright said he would never veto a bill to allow prayer because his mother would turn over in her grave if he did. So the state law went into effect without the governor's signature, but it became a part of state code all the same. Still is. And since then, the state has adopted several other laws that explicitly protect the right of students to express their religious beliefs at school in a number of ways, and to carve out ways of touching on religious subjects in certain kinds of coursework, while also clarifying that teachers and administrators should neither advocate for or against any religion. Threading the needle continues to be the name of the game in Tennessee. Theoretically. But just last year, after 3 decades of student-led prayer being the agreed-upon, state-sanctioned workaround, a national group called the Freedom from Religion Foundation filed a formal complaint against One Spring Hill School. A parent had turned to the organization after the principal of Battle Creek Middle delivered an exclusively Christian prayer at the 8th grade graduation ceremony. A letter sent to the Murray County School District complained that the administrator had not just prayed, but specifically referenced Jesus Christ and Heavenly Father. The group says it reviewed the live stream video of the event to confirm what happened and points out a student who looked visibly uncomfortable, turning to see what everyone else was doing before choosing to conform by bowing their head. What's more, the group had complained about the same principal the year before, too. That time he cited Bible verses during the ceremony. That principal was promoted to lead Battle Creek High School at the start of this academic year. We are now in graduation season. I went to see one of my nephews get his diploma last week, and we've got another ceremony for a different nephew this weekend. All across the state, schools are gathering to celebrate their students' achievement and see them off into a new chapter. And at those schools across the state, you can bet that most of them will be threading that religious needle just the way that the state legislature decided they should. In just a few minutes, how you can help monarch butterflies. That's coming up after the newscast.
The justice system is complicated. I'm Paige Flager, and as WPLN's criminal justice reporter, I'm constantly asking, is the system working? And who is it working for?
The system is broken. I think it's more punitive than anything.
And this is not about justice anymore. This is about vengeance.
We're trying to get justice from a justice system that failed us.
How policies impact real people. Hear their stories here on WPLN News.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. Tennessee was spared the worst of the storms on Friday night, but winds did cause lingering power outages for some in Nashville. About 20,000 NES customers lost power, and a few hundred did not have service restored for more than a day. Winds knocked down trees across the region, and there were reports of half-dollar-sized hail. Kentucky was hit hard, including extensive power outages in Hopkinsville and a possible tornado that destroyed a chicken farm near Elkton. Multiple barns housing as many as 40,000 chickens were impacted. Farther east, Kentucky authorities say the storm killed 18 people in Laurel and Pulaski counties. Scientists have found our region is getting warmer and wetter due to climate change, increasing the risks of severe weather. One recent study found that climate change made April flooding 9% more intense. The families of some of the nearly 200 people arrested by Immigration and Customs Enforcement in South Nashville are beginning to speak publicly about what happened. Hugo Francisco Ramirez Gonzalez, a 19-year-old from Guatemala, went out for ice cream with relatives on May 3rd. He was on his way to the gym afterwards when ICE arrested him and took him in shackles to a prison in Louisiana. His aunt told the Tennessean he came to the United States as an unaccompanied teenager, enrolled himself in high school, got a job at a landscaping company, and bought land for his family to build on. Traffic stops are not the only type of immigration arrests in Nashville. In April, a woman in her 50s who was attempting to travel back to her native El Salvador was arrested by ICE at the Nashville airport. Esperanza de la Paz Hernando de Lonas had been deported from the U.S. 3 times before. Her recent detention comes at a moment when Republican politicians across the country, including Middle Tennessee Congressman Andy Ogles, are encouraging undocumented immigrants to self-deport or leave voluntarily. Hernandez was apparently trying to do so. A federal jury has found former Tennessee House Speaker Glenn Cassada and his top aide, Cade Cothran, guilty on corruption charges. The two were found to have run an illegal kickback scheme. Both men could face up to 20 years in prison when they are sentenced in September. State agents are investigating a fatal shooting by a Chattanooga police. The TBI says 3 men in a car tried to flee from officers in a strip mall parking lot by ramming into other vehicles. An officer shot 2 of the men, fatally wounding the 21-year-old driver. The TBI is looking into 19 other shootings by law enforcement across the state this year. State law allows the Department of Correction to keep secrets about executions from the public, including its source for lethal injection drugs. WPLN's health reporter Catherine Sweeney tells us a judge will decide how far that secrecy extends.
This is one of the first steps in an ongoing lawsuit challenging the protocol on behalf of 9 death row inmates. One of their claims? Too much secrecy makes it impossible to know whether the drugs are safe. Pharmaceutical companies refuse to sell their products, like pentobarbital, for use in executions, so states have to go underground. The challengers argue that to determine how safe the drugs are, they need to interview people, like the supplier, under these strict confidentiality rules. Cody Brandon from the Attorney General's office argues the risk of a leak is too great.
If the identity of the department supplier of lethal injection chemicals is revealed, PDOC will lose access to pentobarbital.
Those suing say they've done these confidential interviews in Tennessee before, with no leaks. Catherine Sweeney, WPLN News.
Tennessee is scheduled to execute one of the 9 inmates, Oscar Isaac Smith, this week. His attorneys have asked Governor Bill Lee to pause executions until this lawsuit is decided. He hasn't commented on whether he will. A man accused of using patients as so-called human pincushions has been sentenced to 18 months in prison. Michael Kessner faced up to 20 years after convictions last year on 13 felonies for fraud. He was the head of Pain MD, a company that for decades gave hundreds of thousands of patients painkiller injections that were questionable. Federal documents show that while many doctors at the time were cutting back on prescribing painkillers because of the opioid crisis, Pain MD did not. In fact, the company claimed that the shots would not only ease pain, but lessen any dependence. During Kessner's trial, the Justice Department was able to prove that the injections were part of a long scheme to defraud Medicare and other insurance programs by millions of dollars. A federal judge called Kessner a ruthless businessman who did not care about his patients. But he was given the lighter sentence because the judge felt Kessner would struggle in federal prison because of his age. He's 73, and because he's not in good physical health. A civil rights pioneer and longtime government attorney has been honored by the University of Tennessee. Rita Sanders Geyer filed a class action lawsuit against the state in 1968. She challenged an unequal system of higher education. WPLN contributor Emily Siner says the ceremony was a poignant, full circle moment.
In the late 60s, Tennessee colleges were still almost completely separated by race. And Geyer, who was a law student at the time, helped craft a legal argument that the state was required to proactively desegregate its public universities. Over the next few decades, similar cases emerged in several other southern states, including one in Mississippi that ended up in front of the U.S. Supreme Court.
The university, sued by Geyer decades ago, has now given her an honorary doctorate. It's Safe Boating Week in Tennessee and across the nation, and authorities are calling attention to the 8 fatalities on waterways thus far this year. Boaters are encouraged to brush up on their safety skills through the Memorial Day weekend. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is looking to classify the monarch butterfly as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. The Appalachia Mid-South Newsroom's Riley Thompson spoke with experts about threats to the species and what you can do to help.
Because you remember that, see?
Yes.
And that's why I do what I do.
Yes.
Chris Light is a science educator at the American Museum of Science and Energy in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. She says she's always had an affinity for bugs.
Actually, the front license plate on my car is monarch. I used to have one that said bug lady. I taught a lot of insect classes. The kids call me the bug lady.
Light started raising monarch butterflies when she found one outside her child's classroom 30 years ago.
We had one time, there was a hurricane where my parents lived, and we had to go down there and help them clean them up. Well, I had a chrysalis, and I told my husband, I said, we're going to have to take his chrysalis with us.
Monarch butterflies play an integral role in our ecosystem. They're pollinators. They help breed our flowers, grow our food, and they serve as a food source for other species like lizards and birds. But monarch populations are declining. They occupied only 2 acres of land during their hibernation in Mexico in 2024.
Any organism that you lose is a loss, which can affect other things down the line.
Their population did see an increase from 2024 to 2025, with nearly double the acreage being occupied during hibernation. But experts aren't sure if those numbers will continue to rise next year. To help address the issue, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service issued a proposal in December to label the monarchs as threatened, offering them certain protections under the Endangered Species Act. The department reopened the public comment period this spring to determine what those protections should include. Kristen Lund is the Endangered Species Act coordinator for monarch butterflies.
So we'll get comments for and against lots of different things in the rule, and we'll have to base our final review and any changes we make to it on the best scientific literature that we get and the best commercial information that we get. And so it'll all be balanced to represent what we think is best for the species.
The public comment period will remain open until May 19th. In the meantime, experts say there are other ways people can help the monarch butterfly. One is to provide support for their months-long journey from Mexico to Canada. Now the temperatures are warming up, monarchs are migrating north, passing through parts of the Midwest and South along the way. Steve McGaffin is the director of the Tennessee Butterfly Monitoring Network at Zoo Knoxville. He says they'll need lots of nectaring flowers to eat and milkweed to lay eggs on.
So planting milkweed that will be out in the spring and the summer is what will help them the most. You still need the nectar plants because they need fuel. The adults don't eat leaves. The adults only drink nectar.
McGaffin says public participation in species conservation isn't always possible, but for pollinators it can be.
I'm not going to go to the Malay Peninsula and go save tigers. I don't have that experience and I don't have that knowledge and probably don't have the money. But I can go into my backyard or in my front yard and plant native plants that will attract pollinators and provide habitat for pollinators.
Now is a great time to plant milkweed in your garden as monarchs begin making their way through states including Tennessee, Kentucky, and North Carolina on their path to Canada. For the Appalachia Mid-South Newsroom, I'm Riley Thompson.
The Appalachia Mid-South Newsroom is a collaboration between NPR and several public radio stations in West Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky, including this one, WPLN News. Thanks for listening to the Nash Villager podcast. We take this look at Nashville news every weekday. If you like it, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and tell a friend or give us a mention on your socials. It really helps get the word out. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can give at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.